When King Charles III took his oath to a specific god, is it the God of the Bible,
Right.
or is it another God that one needs to ask? Because it's not named, just God. It's kind of generic as they bring that out. And so they, in the Royal belief system, they received their divine right from a specific God to rule. But that God is connected, as they show in their heraldic coat of arms, taciturn imagery of their bloodlines back to a specific angelic being. And you have dragons, you have eagles, you have bulls, you have all sorts of different things that are in there that they understand as being their celestial mafia godfathers.
Welcome to Far Out with Faust, everybody. I am Faust Chicho, and today I'm very excited and delighted to be joined by Gary Wayne. Gary is a Christian contrarian, I love that, by the way, who has maintained a lifelong love affair with biblical prophecy, history, and mythology. His extensive study has encompassed the Holy Bible and Gnostic scriptures, the Quran, the Bhagavad, I knew I was going to trip up with that, the Bhagavad Gita, the Gilgamesh and other ancient epics, language, etymology, and secret society publications. In fact, he spent almost a decade studying secret societies. And there's so much to talk about, Gary. Thank you so much for beaming in. I want to jump right in.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and so happy to be here with you today. And very much looking forward to the conversation and talking to a new audience for the most part for me. So always excited to do that.
Me too, man. Me too. I was like the scope of your work is immense. So trying to figure out how to get my audience connected to it, because I think a lot of the podcasts you go on, have a very strong biblical undercurrent, let's say, and mine probably doesn't have quite that amount of strength. so I want to lead them into this the right way. What my followers and listeners do have a good strength in is secret societies. And so I thought a good place to start would be the absolutely incredible way that you have, your book does this in an incredible way. It intersects biblical narrative with the origin of secret societies. And I thought that would be a very interesting place to start for any listener. And so let's go there.
Yeah, sounds like a really good place to start. And so for the audience who may not be all that aware of who I am a Christian contrarian, so I like to verify everything myself. I don't believe what somebody says something says unless I go verify that myself, whether it's written or oral or whatever. So, and I do my research in the Bible that way and outside the Bible that way. So for people who aren't Christians, sit back and relax. I'm not here to convert you, but I always hope that if you like what I say, maybe you'll give the Bible a look or give my research a look. But I try and connect dots for people. So it's been an interesting sort of quest for me. And I didn't want to research secret societies. I had no intentions, didn't know much about them. Thought, why would I ever dig into that sort of thing? And so I started on it because as I was writing the Genesis 6 Conspiracy Book 1, I was thinking I needed to add in additional information for Christians, and that I knew from my previous passion of history and mythology that what Genesis 6 talks about in terms of the creation of the giants, it was one of those things that permeates all other cultures and all continents around the world. Same creation story, just different lens, a polytheist lens for the most part, because the seculars don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. So we'll just leave it sort of at that from a secular perspective. And so I thought I would put in some of that context so that Christians would understand that there's a larger record of some of the things that we believe. And so when I did that, I thought, but Christians have no idea of the context. What was the culture? And for the most part, the religion was the culture. And so I had to learn all about that. So that took me down rabbit holes reading whether or not it's the Gnostic Gospels, or it's the Book of Mormon, or it's the Popol Vuh, or it is the Rig Vedas and the Upanishads and the Bhagavad. I always screw that one up too.
That's my fault.
Bhagavad
It's
Gita.
contagious.
If you say it quickly, your tongue goes in knots, so you want to be careful with it. And just identifying the links and some of the information, and that led me into this ideology that within the upper class system of the polytheist cultures, you had mystery schools that were teaching the knowledge, because it's basically a knowledge cult or knowledge religion in the polytheist religions. And so that was taught through the mystery schools. And out of the mystery schools came the secret societies. And I thought, well, that's an interesting connection. But I thought, I don't really want to go there. But I did, and I was down that rabbit hole for 8 or 10 years, and you could have been down there forever on the research. But I was shocked to find out that the secret societies take their creation back to patriarchs discussed in the Bible, and this is through their own history. The more common ones that people might know are some of the legends of Freemasonry that Albert Mackey might have written about in the 1800s, or more current Masonic historians like Knight and Lomas, amongst a host of others who talk about these ancient things. And the Polychronicon, which was originally the oral history that, at least in part, was put down into a written form in the Middle Ages. And they take large sections of the Bible and put that around their history, and they take their history back to the time of Noah, to the time of Lamech and his sons Jubal and Jubal and Nama and Tubal-Cain, and even further back to Enoch, and also recognizing Cain and Adam. And that just sort of blew my mind. And so that's when I started to dig into it as to, okay, so if it started before the flood, what does that mean? And how did it cross the flood? And of course, they account for that as well in their history. So that's how I got into it. And then I realized that secret societies were with us all throughout our history. And they're with us to this day.
Oh, yeah.
And so as I was looking at how that intersected with biblical history, I saw significant parallels again. And so I decided to put in more of that. So it turned into a completely different book than what I sort of intended to set out. And, you know, I stopped writing it many times because I thought nobody's going to believe a word of this. They're going to think I'm a psycho or crazy or whatever, and nobody's going to buy it. So why do it? But I couldn't leave it alone. I just had to know more, and I had to figure out how it connected. So that's how I came about researching secret societies and putting it into book 1. And then I finish it off on secret societies in book 2 to give a little bit more on some of the things I didn't cover, like the organizational structure of the secret societies and the Jesuits in particular, that I talk about how their beginnings come about, or the building blocks for their beginnings, but I don't put all of that in. And I didn't want to get people lost in terms of the debate of who's higher up in the secret societies, because that takes a lot of time to explain as well.
Yeah, and I know book 1 you were cresting, reaching 1,000 pages and realizing I should probably. I
did cut it back over 300 pages,
right,
and it's still an 800-page book. Wow. And book 2, the only thing I promised on that, it would be shorter. And it is. It's only 760 pages. So.
Wow. So that's incredible, the amount of time you've devoted, and I'm sure you're very delighted you pursued it and persisted, because it's we live in a time now when people are just so hungry for this information and connecting the dots in every way possible. So you really I think everything works divinely as far as timing goes, and there's this greater plan, and I see that with the publication of your work at the time it was. So it's awesome.
Well, and it comes with mixed blessings, so to speak, so that I present a fair bit of knowledge for people, but it's a drop in the bucket as to the size and the scope of that whole organizational structure, their organizations, their history, their belief systems. And so a lot of times Christians will say, well, we're not going to believe a word he says because he's obviously a Mason. Well, I'm not a Freemason or any secret society member. And and I was kind of concerned when I was putting it out is what kind of reaction would I get from the people in the secret societies? And actually, it's way more positive than negative because they kind of like having a lot of the information put together. They may not believe with my other belief systems, but that sort of part doesn't get challenged a whole lot. And actually, to verify things, it was within the secret societies that of people that I've talked to that were verifying me on things as I was going and saying, am I going in the right direction or the wrong direction? And so I have a lot of contact, even through social media today, saying, hey, look, we really like some of the stuff that you've talked about. Can I ask you this question?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. So validating. You've spent a lot of time researching ancient history, secret societies, alternative texts, and as I'm sure some of the backlash you've got has been from the scholars, who believe they have it all figured out because that's a very rigid structure that they're taught.
I'll give you an example. Like when my book first came out, and I didn't even know whether or not anybody would take the time to read it, let alone take the time to criticize it. But one of the things that they seized on right in the beginning, and I thought this is kind of odd, but because I talk about this organization called the Priory of Sion. That's talked about in some fiction narratives as well. And so they were just all over how you could take any book with any credibility that there's no such historical reference to that. I'm going, but they're lying. There are lots of references, and book one was more intended to let other people and other belief systems speak in their own words. So I would, given the alternative, go to let them speak for themselves so people couldn't say I was manipulating what they said. And so that's where the references I would use would come from. And they're saying, well, they don't have sources. Well, I checked their sources. They have sources. So in book two, I decided I'd spend a little bit more time on the Priory of Sion and go directly to their sources, and then beyond those sources back to the original sources to quote both the Catholic Encyclopedia and historians of that time, like William of Tyre, right out of William and Tyre, to talk about that organization and how it produced the Knights Templar. So it's crazy that you think that even the people that are trying to promote nothing but objective thought wouldn't put out misinformation, but that's not true. That's why you have to verify everything.
You really do. And that's probably one of the farthest things from the truth. They tend to be the most closed-minded about what they think you should believe.
Yeah, they're so intolerant in their system of beliefs. You'd say we want all things discussed and debated so that we can find a better way to the real truth. But it's
air it out. That's what I say. Whether you're talking about theology or science, we air when we air it out, we really get a chance. And then it has a chance to truly stand, on its own, and in the sun where everyone can see it. That's the best place to do these things. And it always amazes me how that is not the turn society has taken as we, venture off into the quote age of information. But I mean, it's humans we're talking about. But
yes,
So, what inspired you? Because I know that at one point you were even an atheist, and so you've taken this pretty radical turn, and something convinced you that everything in the Bible wasn't just meaningful, but also divinely inspired and historically accurate. And so, as someone who has come into in-depth study, about not just the text itself, but where they come from, who put it forth, who decided it should go in, who decided the ones that shouldn't. I would love to hear what was the catalyst for your change. Yeah.
So, and I didn't do it quickly in terms of converting to be a Christian. So I was very stiff-necked. I'm a contrarian, and I was pretty set in my belief system. So when I was about 20 or 21, it was a Friday night, and my brother had come over with a friend, and we got into the beers, and late into the beers, they started talking about false prophet and antichrist and really weird stuff. And
Is that a Canadian thing? No, I'm just kidding.
no, it's not. Believe me, it is not. So I thought, well, this is a pretty bizarre conversation. And then one of them said to me, "We have a challenge for you. How much courage do you have?" And I said, at that age, I'm not really
Especially
afraid of anything. Yeah, several beers in. Yeah, let's go. Bring it on. And so they said, well, we have a book for you to read. And, I got a number of books that are flashing through my mind what that might be. But it was a book I had not heard of before. It was called The Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey, who was a Christian writer who wrote many books in the 60s, 70s, and 80s and 90s on prophecy. And this one was, I think, written in the late 60s, early 70s. So he was way kind of ahead of his time on this whole concept of and of getting things reasonably correct from a biblical perspective. And so I read the book, and it scared the socks off of me that if any of this, even 10% of this was true, I needed to know more about it, but I had to verify in my own mind whether or not he was quoting the Bible accurate. Was it completely out of context? And at that time we had, and to some extent still do have, a lot of tricksters that are out there making money off of Christianity and making things up and doing all sorts of things to tarnish the whole theology of Christianity. So I wanted to verify it. The only way I could verify it was buy a Bible, look up the passages, and see whether he quoted them correctly, but it didn't tell me whether it was in context of the whole Bible, right? You take a small snippet out, and you can make it mean almost anything that you want. So then I had to start reading the Bible to do that, and reading the Old Testament was absolutely painful, and I stopped and started many times and saying, why am I even doing this? This is all crazy to begin with. But I couldn't leave it alone. I had to sort of know. So I said, I'll just plow my way through what I thought was an extraordinarily excruciating amount of minutiae and details of the Old Testament. And what started to sway me was reading the four Gospels. And I thought about the words that Jesus had said, and I thought to myself, whoever he is, this isn't the words of your average human, and it may not be human words. His understanding is far greater than anything else that I've kind of read from anything in the book. It was just so distinctly different. And as I learned, it wasn't that much different. It's just that he had a way of putting things together that nobody else could, which from a Christian perspective should be there, but I wasn't there as a Christian yet. So I started to pay attention. So then I read through the rest of the New Testament, and then I thought, okay, well, that didn't really help me a whole bunch because it's such a massive piece of writing. And so the only way I can verify what he's doing is I have to go through and I have to write down all the different prophecy narratives, because I was seeing some consistency of prophecy from the Old Testament right to Revelation, of course. So I started to do that with highlighters, ran out of colors, needed to get more, didn't have enough colors of that, had to start all over again and start handwriting them into files at that time. Realized I didn't have enough files, and this project is getting to be very, very large. And as I'm doing this, I'm getting more appreciation for the interconnectedness of the Bible. But this is still crazy stuff. And one of the crazy things is Genesis 6. And every time you start the Bible, it doesn't get long before, it's not a long time before you get into the creation of the giants. And I'm going, every time I read that, whatever that is, I'm not here for, but that's just crazy. Like, I don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole.
Right.
But because I was trying to be thorough on the understanding of this possibility that there could be ancient writings, that I also kind of knew from other mythology and stuff that this is not unknown in polytheism either, to have end time and prophecies and different ages and things like that. So I knew there was more to this than just the biblical sort of side. So then I decided to start documenting the giants. And, after over 15 years of logging this, I started, I had putting it into binders and different sort of prophecy narratives and stuff. And I thought I could write a number of books here, and I'm not fully converted at this point. Like I say, I'm coming about this sort of slowly, and it's not that far along when I start to say, okay, I better start to commit myself. But committing yourself and really committing yourself are two different things. So as you're going through this process, it's not an easy process to write this book. So I put it aside many times. But anyways, I decided I should write a book that to see whether I could get published, because I don't have a university education. I have not gone to a seminary school or theology school. I'm not a minister. And I have no platform whatsoever. I'm just Joe Schmo from wherever, and I've got some crazy ideas I'm trying to put down on paper. So I thought, well, why don't I do something fun? Why don't I sort of write about these things about giants and connect it to Revelation and end time prophecy somehow, some way, and because there seems to be a relationship here.
Yeah.
And so I thought, okay, I'll do that. So that's when I wrote the first 10 chapters. And then after that, that's, as I said earlier, when I started going down the stream. So, but certainly by the time when I decided to write that book, I'm a Christian follower, because you wouldn't do it otherwise unless you're trying to trash Christianity, which was going to be my intent. So you have to kind of make a decision. But as I say, I would not have peace every time I dropped it. And I dropped the project many times. There'd be no peace until I came back. And if I had difficulty getting information, it would, in extraordinary ways, make itself available to me, which I thought this is too weird. This is not normal. But it would always sort of continue. And so it was one of those things that was was going to be a lifelong hobby, trying to write this book, because I started writing the book in about 1996, and it didn't publish. I didn't start trying to publish it until 2013. So
Wow. That's I believe me, having become a bit of an avid researcher myself, I know what happens when you are seeking information that is not on, at least on the surface, easily found. And then kind of the moment you try to walk away, like, all of a sudden all this information starts popping up, and you're like, what the, it's amazing how that works. People who have this experience will understand, and others will have to take our word for it. But so
one of the craziest stories on it is and there's lots in different ways, but I wanted to get some of the history and religion in about the Mayans, because they play such an important part. And but the Popol Vuh was out of print. And so I couldn't get it anywhere. So I thought there's just no way I'm going to be able to include it. And my wife and I were on a cruise in the Caribbean, long after I thought I would never, put it in. And we stopped at the river, the Mayan Riviera, and went into a small town, and we're just walking through the town, and all of a sudden my wife says, I'm really hot, I need to get some water. And she walks into this hole in the wall store, long and kind of narrow, and there's not a ton of stuff in there, but they're selling some drinks and stuff. And so as we walk in, I get this feeling I need to go to the back of the store. So I go back to the store. There's a few shelves up there, and it's got a few books on it, and it's got one copy of the Popol Vuh. I pick it up, buy it, walk out, and then I put it into my book.
How much was the book?
It was like under $10. It was dirt cheap too. So
wow. That's amazing.
So it's like, and I try and get a copy of the Popol Vuh even today. You basically have to buy a used one if you can get it.
Right. And it won't be probably $10.
Yeah.
So help my audience understand the importance of Genesis 6, and if you want to call it a conspiracy, that's fine. I'm not crazy about the word, but the Genesis 6 conspiracy, and like, why is it so important for them to have knowledge of?
Well, for Christians, it makes the whole Bible make sense. And it starts to take away the questions. For non-Christians, it makes the world make sense. And by inference, after Christians can understand the Bible better, now they can understand the world better. So the book turned into a book about how the Bible intersects with the world testimony. And so I'm trying to talk about a common history and an understanding of how we get here to today, and that all of the belief systems around the world have a version of the end time. They have a different outcome than what the Christian one or the Judaic one might be, or the Islamic one might be from the monotheist side. But they all are saying that there's the same set of events that are going to happen. So it's important to understand how our world works. So I don't care who you are, people are saying more and more today that there's something wrong in the world. Something's not right. And we're heading in a direction in a faster and faster way, and we don't understand where the accelerant is coming from or what the destination is, but it doesn't feel right, and it's too fast. So this book will put a lot of that into context. And again, it doesn't matter whether you're secular, it doesn't matter whether you're polytheist or monotheist. It will help you understand how we got here, what our common history was, and then start to wake you up to start asking questions about what you see today, and then make your own decisions as to what you think about that. So it's I think it's an eye-opening read for people, no matter where you come from. And of course, a lot of people will just trash it and throw it away, sure, but it resonates with so many other people in terms of, I understand now. I don't agree with everything you say, but I understand the world a lot better, and that's what I'm just trying to do, is just sort of connect dots for people. And it was originally sort of just to connect dots in terms of where we came from, and then talk a little bit about end-time prophecy. But at that time, I didn't realize how much information was out there from the other religions about the end time as well. So
there's a whole lot out there. Although I feel like the Abrahamic religions are some of the darkest, with the darkest endings. Apocalyptic.
Well,
versions.
that's what they say, but that's not quite really true. So the first thing I would say in response to that is there an end time, and is there Armageddon? Yes. Is it the end of the world? No. And it continues. Now let's look at sort of a generic polytheist version, where you have the age of Aquarius and destruction by fire, where a god like a god of Mithra or Mithra, depending on how you want to pronounce that, comes at the end of this age as an incarnation, and the world is destroyed, and then it's renewed. Or Shiva comes as the destroyer of the world, but is also a regenerator of the world. Both are talking about a destruction of fire. Both are talking about a continuation, but it's a little bit different continuation. So the outcomes are slightly different, so to speak. But you can't really look at a whole lot of difference in terms of the tribulation and the destruction that might be coming, no matter what religious view you come from.
That's one of my problems with the views, is they seem so bleak to me. I mean, most of my listeners will know that I call myself a former Catholic. I believe in Jesus. I of course believe in God, and I have a very healthy relationship with both. But I've kind of shied away from Catholicism for a lot of reasons. But I've also been knee deep in historical events, and going back to 2,000 years ago and coming into this modern age, and I see, like you described, the mess that we're in, the mess that's been created, and I've studied some of these events that have shaped our view, like our unfortunate view of humanity and our quote human nature, and I've studied a lot of real history compared to the propaganda and nonsense that we're taught in school about what happened, and this is what happened in this war, and 9/11 was 19 Arab hijackers, which we knew the moment the planes hit. And so, but also it's given me an opportunity to peek behind the curtain and study the people orchestrating these calamities, and what I've put together, which I'm sure that you have knowledge of as well, is that these are the same royals. They're the same families that date back and who imagine that they are somehow chosen descendants of some of these biblical bloodlines, and they use that, whether it's true or not. They have absolutely commandeered it as a use of control, deception, and power. And I have a big problem with that. And I'm wondering, from your observation, how did something that's supposed to be tied to the divine and Jesus and good, how did these families and this nefarious control enslavement system we see in place come from that? How do those two end up in the same a rhythmic equation?
Yeah, great question for sure. So let's put it in a little bit of context and supportive of your premise for the question. So let's go back 100 years, just over 100 years, and we have the First World War, right? But is it really a world war, or is it a war between families? They're all cousins. All the royals intermarry to keep their bloodlines pure, and they all believe they have the divine right to rule, and this is an interfamily squabble, and World War II is just an extension out of World War I. So these royals not only somehow believe that they have a divine right to rule, they also seem to have a perpetual war gene, because they're always in rivals, and they're the ones causing terror around the world. One of the terms in the KJV Bible is called the terrible ones. These are their ancestors. So what makes a royale? And that's a question I used to ask early on, and most people would say, well, I don't know what gives them that right. And what gave them the right to set up a four-class system all around the world, whether it's a feudal system in Europe, or it's the four-class system on First Nation reserves in North America, or the four-class system in India. It's the same system all over the world. How is that even possible, that you have the same four-class divisions, and in the top two class, their extended family of nobility populates all of those first two classes until, the last 100 years or so, where there's been a permission for a short time, I think, to create an expanded middle class. So their families populate all of those who lead the armies, all of those who are in the religious class as the priests and the doing the teachings. They're the ones who do the education of only the elite. They are the ones who run the government. They run everything. They are the oligarchs. And the bottom two classes will include, in the old system, a small entrepreneurial class like tailors and bakers and blacksmiths and things and services that they need. And then you have a labor or, as part of the same group, a slave and ritual sacrifice class, depending on what part of history that we're talking about. And so this is the same system that's in place in most of the world, even to this day. So how were they able to do that, and how did they justify that? Well, one of the keys is that they look at themselves as the elite, right? And that's got a Hebrew word in there for the first part, El, which is an angel or a god. So, and they use "ite" as in the ites that they use in the KJV. So it's kind of, you're using some of their Baconian English that they helped create for the language of the Bible. And so it probably should be Elim if you're being true to the Hebrewic nature. And so that's the plural used for giants in the Bible, like Horim or Avim or Nephilim or Rephaim. And I am, in its ancient understanding, was a suffix used to suggest a majestic bloodline, a dynastic bloodline that comes from the gods. So let's look at that word royale now. Royale, as you take that back in its etymology, means roy, as in Old French for king, that's adopted into the English, but goes back to regal, regalis, and reg in Latin, and back to Indo-Aryan as reg. And Indo-Aryan is the language of the giants, and there's 4 to 5 groups that show up after the flood, and there's many other groups that show up before the flood, although most associate them as the same. That could be, but there seems to be a distinction between post-Diluvian giants and antediluvian giants. And the language of the giants permeates our language today because it's part of the legacy and the history that they keep alive before us with intentional purposes, and they know that the lower classes aren't smart enough to understand. At least that's their thought process. And so when we look at that word Al there, that's a transliteration of El as in Hebrew. And what are other transliterations? Well, you might have Il or Ilu in the Mesopotamian languages. Al can be used in some of the Aramaic and Arabic languages for the same meanings as for a god or an angel or the God Most High in the Bible, depending on how it's used. And so Baal, for example, of the Baalim gods that are mentioned in the Bible and highly Baal is a highly approved god, so to speak, within the secret societies, can mean master god or lord god, right? So now you have a word that's basically saying the kings of God. And in book 1, I used the Latin term for that, rex deus, which means kings of God as well. And we'd also might notice that as the black nobility. And the black nobility and all of these people have a gens and a bloodline and genealogy that they keep that goes back into the mists of time, according to them.
According to them, yes.
According to them, and we want to be very, very clear on that. And I get asked a lot, do you believe what the Royals believe? I said, it doesn't really matter whether I believe it or not. It's that they believe it, and it's what they do with that belief system that we need to be concerned with, and what they will do with that belief system. And
what they
so
are doing and have been doing.
Yeah. So with the Royals, they have this ancient right of inheritance that they believe in as well through this majestic bloodline or a gens. And they all have specific genses that I'll come back to. So in King Charles III that we just saw, that ancient ritual that Queen Elizabeth went through, a little bit larger version of the older ritual with Queen Elizabeth II in the early 1950s. But nonetheless, the same ritual that's used by royals all throughout the Western world, and likely very similar to ones that were done with royal bloodlines that were in China and elsewhere, and probably even Japan to this day. Because polytheism is the same religion. We have different sects and different vernacular branches around the world, different names for the same gods in the pantheon, but essentially the same religion that's evolved a little bit within the rituals and the customs of the people as they developed around the world. But it's the same root religion. So the Royals are going to have that common denominator as the beholders and the protectors of that ancient religion. So when King Charles III took his oath to a specific god, is it the God of the Bible,
right,
or is it another God that one needs to ask? Because it's not named, just God. It's kind of generic as they bring that out. And so they, in the Royal belief system, they receive their divine right from a specific God to rule. But that God is connected, as they show in their heraldic coat of arms, taciturn imagery of their bloodlines, back to a specific angelic being. And you have dragons, you have eagles, you have bulls, you have all sorts of different things that are in there that are allegoric, taciturn terms that they understand as being their, tongue-in-cheek, their celestial mafia godfathers.
Yes.
It's literally, as I say that sort of tongue in cheek. So they take their royal bloodline back to a specific Rephaim and Nephilim patriarch, or both, depending on how the scioning and grafting of bloodlines go, and then back to a specific God who created them. So we should not be surprised when we talk about this family war of World War I, and that they intermarried to keep their bloodlines as pure as possible, not to be mixed with the lower level of beings that they consider themselves superior as elites. That is also defined within that definition of having that privileged position through genealogy. Right?
Yeah.
So what they have done is created a system where a small group of people control everything, and they did that through dividing up the land amongst the people. So in England, for example, they were able to have less than 1% of the population own more than 99% of the land, and kept control with that system that's in place. And so when we look at the King Charles III now, he said he takes his genealogy back to Vlad the Impaler.
Wow.
And he said that several times, and you can Google that. So
That's right. That's right. I remember seeing a video of him saying that. I was like, why would you tell people that, dude?
Yeah. Because they know we don't know anything.
Yeah.
And if we know a little bit, that's all we know. So how does he get there? Like, how would that even be possible? It's because of the intermarriage, but you have to remember that the Windsors isn't their original name.
That's
it's
right.
Hanover, but they changed to Windsor in World War I because Hanovers are German, and it's the Middle Europa intermarriage where that scioning in of Vlad the Impaler would come from. And Vlad the Impaler, they take their royal bloodlines back to a couple of angels, but the most interesting one and the easiest one to explain with the audience we're talking about today, because then I have to get into the Book of Enoch and a whole bunch of other things that they may not know about, is the main branch comes from a Scythian tribe, which are Indo-Aryans. And by the way, Aryan means noble. And they're the nobility. So again, they put all of their history within the terms and the things and display it in plain sight. And the Scythian tribe is the Agrithsi. And this is a tribe created by Hercules after the flood. And Hercules' mother is Alcmene, a human female, and Zeus. Now, that is understood from the Herculides or the Gyges bloodlines as the Cretazans, and noting that Zeus spent a lot of time on Crete, where the word Creta comes from, and is also connected
Did you say
to
credit?
that Creta.
Oh, Creta.
Kreta. And we also get Keret as one of these Baalim gods in the Ugaritic texts. Without getting too far down that, understand then that the Cretagans is the gene of Zeus. And so they take it back to, in this case, Zeus is generally depicted as a serpent in his original format, so seraphim as we would understand that. Part of the serpentine gods that are common all around the world. So we would know those as the dragon creator gods in China. We would know that as Nagas and others types of those gods in India.
South America.
Osiris. Baal, they're Uraeus gods, flying serpents. The plumed serpent, the feathered serpent, Quetzalcoatl, and all the other Central, South American, North American gods. It's the same common legacy, and this is one of those gens is called the Cretagans. Now, you also have in as part of that scioning in, you have the Elbigens, that is part of the Hanover dynasty as well, and they tend to play on a larger percentage of their bloodline from the Elbigens. And Elbi would go back to an angel, not an angel, but a giant as a female, as Alberta, or a name like that, or Albion, or Albert, and understand that these names will cross languages, so they have a little bit different forms. And Albion, before the flood, was a offspring of a parent god versus an offspring god. Parent gods ruled before the flood. Offspring gods rule after the flood. So it helps you understand prehistory. So before the flood in Greek history, that would be Kronos. Zeus rules as the chief god after the flood. Ra rules before the flood in Egypt. Osiris rules afterward. El rules in the Canaanite pantheon before the flood. Baal rules after the flood. Anu rules before the flood in Sumerian history, and Enki or Enlil, which in most people will side with Enki as more the chief god, rules after the flood, but there's an interesting nuance there in the Sumerian version between the two, Enlil and Enki, but that's another rabbit hole. So as we look at that, we have this genealogy that is being presented. So Iapetus is the parent god, that's ruling with the parent gods like Kronos before the flood, who creates Albion, Magog, and Gog, all giants in Greek history. And so you start to see these things, that data points that just become otherwise unexplainable, and that they believe they were given this divine right to rule from the council of the gods, both before the flood and then again after the flood. And the Council of Gods is known all around the world. It's Nippur in Sumeria. It's the hierarchy of gods, of hierarchy of archons, the sacred assembly of archons at Mount Olympus, both before and after the flood in Greek mythology. It's Mount Saphon in the Ugaritic texts. It's Mount Sion, Sinir, Sirion, and Mount Hermon in the Bible. And so, again, just to give people an ideology that this council of gods, both before and after the flood, ruled over the 70 nations, both before and after the flood, and have their own council and a sub-council that we would know as in Tolkien's writing as the Ring Lords, or the Lord of the Rings, or the Knights of the Round Table and Arthurian allegory, is the same council as at Mount Saphon in the Ugaritic text, which is the Council of the Ditanu, Ditanu, and this is the Council of Giants. And the Rephaim, as it's talked about, or the RPM original Semitic there, put in the vowels and the H as the languages evolve, that are talked about in the Bible after the flood. So this is a common legacy, and that all the kings, both before and after the flood, received their divine right of rule from this assembly of the gods to rule. So that was a long story, and we could go on forever, but it's time to let you back in here so you can talk. But I just wanted to give a larger picture as to how it could come about, and then think about all of these connections that are otherwise unexplainable in all cultures and all continents around the world, except for Antarctica, and who knows what's there.
Yeah, I can't wait till the ice melts. Go global warming. No, I'm kidding. God, it was so cold even here in Georgia last few weeks. I was like, God, it really makes me wish global warming was real.
Yes. The more you're exposed to cold, the more you have a biases for global warming. So.
Definitely. These families are just... they are a nuisance to humanity. I mean, the control systems in place are what is responsible for all the strife I see on this planet. And these control systems, they're white knuckling them because they know that with certain technologies and understandings comes true liberation of the human race. And you gotta kind of sit back and marvel at what they've been able to accomplish, manipulating people's beliefs about themselves, about their origins, about this planet. Like in America, I was telling my 13-year-old, I said, dude, if he calls me dude, I say, hey. But I said, dude, do you understand that if I don't pay my taxes on the property that they tell me that I own, they're going to throw me in jail. I said, so tell me how I own property that if I don't continue to pay them on, how is it mine? And he's like, it's not. I was like, that's right, because it's an illusion.
It's an illusion. Yes.
It's an illusion.
It's a lease.
We're still, it's exactly, at best, it's a lease.
Yes.
And I was, I'm trying to get him to see through these societal things that we've been indoctrinated to believe, like nothing's certain but death and taxes and nonsense like this. But it's an amazing web that they have cast over this society. And, you see the struggle going on between people waking up to it and trying to wiggle free. But it's like they knew this day would come, and their control, it's fierce. It's not going to just go away, because people become aware of it.
We get two choices. Do you want to be ruled by an evil tyrant or a less evil tyrant?
Every time, it seems, right?
Yeah.
And that's what's so astounding about, these families who claim to be descendants of these giants and deities. It's like, but some of those deities were supposedly benevolent, and I guess, the answer is they believe that this is the most benevolent route, even if it means sacrificing, people all the time, one way or another. It's just it's mind-boggling.
Well, if we look at sort of the greater nature, one of the questions to start to ask is, if there are gods, and then the Bible recognizes there's a God and there are gods, then which ones are good and which ones are not, and how are they distinguished? And within the polytheistic side, you have a dualism that's going on that I would call more micro than macro. So on the macro side, it's Satan or Lucifer or Halel, and all the other names that he has associated with them are the equivalent of the God of the Bible, and they're perpetually at each side. So depending on which side you're on, one side's good, one side's evil. You have to decide which side you're on, and then the other side obviously is evil from the macro level. But from the micro level, in polytheism, you have good versus evil too. You have good magic, you have evil magic. You have good giants, you have evil giants. You have, in the modern parlance today, you have white hats and dark hats. And it's said that even within the pantheon, there are good gods and evil gods. The trouble is, within the pantheon, it's the same religion from a monotheist perspective. And from the giant side of the white hats or the dark hats, they all worship that same pantheon of gods, and none of them have the lower level of being humans, as they would look at us, in their better interest. The white hats have a nicer way of getting to the same agenda, but it ends the same way for us. So it's a matter of sort of distinguishing who you want to be with, whether you're a monotheist or which side you're going to be on if you're a polytheist. And if you're a secular, you're really one of the two. You just don't know, but a choice is a decision whether you'd make it or not. So it's things that we ought to want to learn more about, so we can at least make an informed decision as to what we believe, whatever that belief system is. And within the bloodlines of the royals, there's rivals. They've had rivals and created perpetual war in that rivalry ever since. And it's how they control us as well, because they set us against whoever their perceived enemy is at that time, or rival. Even though they're working for a common destiny, you might want to look at an older series of movies and televisions called Highlander, where there can only be one.
That's right. There can only be one Highlander.
Yeah, so there can only be one that's going to rule over the world at the end. One bloodline, one dragon messiah from a polytheist perspective. And so now let's look at what happened again in an analogy about World War II. So within World War II, you have this family rivalry going on, and we don't know what's really behind it, but for some reason, they erupt. And some of the reasons tend to be is it was actually a way to get at the Tsar bloodline, what people would know today as the Romanov bloodline, but that's a junior offshoot of the Putyanin bloodline that settled Moscow, set up that dynasty as a branch of the Kievan, Putyanin, or Urartu dynasty. So understand these bloodlines are in play, and it's really the Putyanin bloodline that's being looked at here. And the Western European bloodlines look at that as a more pure bloodline, and they're not cooperating with the Western Europeans. So they create something within their societies of something called social masonry that would manifest at the time of World War I as communism. It starts obviously before with some of the writings and the dogma and the funding, and then they sick, Trotsky and Lenin on Russia during as a manifestation of the war, as an opportunity to take out the bloodline, and they almost wipe them right out before they're done. So that's a major play, but social masonry doesn't die because communism gets out of control, and they go rogue. And so now they have to create national socialism to take on to take on communism. And you find out why start to learn why he's so obsessed with taking out communism, because that's his raison d'etre, right? But he goes rogue too. So now they have to fund the Allies to take down National Socialism. But are they done there? No, because now you have the fall of the Kaisers all through World War I and World War II. You have a weakening of the von Habsburgs. Communism was used to bring down the Bourbon in Spain. And then social masonry is launched on China to bring down the Shah dynasty. And you see this rivalry that's going on behind the scenes for this major power play. So when you start to roll forward to our times, you're starting to see a bloodline pushback. So, for example, President Xi is from the Western bloodline of the Shah dynasty, back on the throne, so to speak, because he's made himself basically president for life. And Li would be the other main family from the Eastern bloodline. And those bloodlines populate most of the Southeast dynasties. Even the Yamada dynasty of Japan comes from the Shah dynasty. And so you have Xi saying, I don't really like what the Western bloodlines are doing. I'm not against a new world order, new Nephilim world order, as I would sort of call it, or a Nephilim, two different meanings to similar pronouncing words. But I want a larger role. Putin creates a mythos, true or not, that he goes back as to his grandfather as an illegitimate child of the Putyanin dynasty, whom his father moves to St. Petersburg in World War I. That's how he ends up in Russia. It says that he's part of the Putyanin bloodline, which is why he honors, Vladimir the Great and created the statue of him. And he wants to recreate the Romanov dynasty, as he talked about in the Tucker Carlson interview. And he's saying, I want a bigger role for Russia in the New World Order. We have President Trump, both in the last presidency and in this presidency, saying, I'm not against the New World Order. I want a larger role for the United States in this world order. And I'm not saying Trump is of a bloodline. I think he'd be very low level at if at all. But he is still talking the language of rival bloodlines.
Yep, he's literally the perfect candidate to get in there in order to, take America to the forefront of the charge of the New World Order. He is his ego, and don't get me wrong, I don't think he's necessarily a witting participant, but he's already renamed the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. I mean, are we? Yeah. What? He's already tried to buy Greenland. Obviously, he's trying to expand the empire, and these people and their agenda, they're willing to, call it whatever you want. As long as everything ends up under one rule, it'll be a lot easier for us to do what we intend to do. And so
Yeah.
if it's if it's the world American, then we'll take over America. They play the long game, and people don't understand that. They're like, Trump should buy Greenland. Let's buy every continent. I'm like, well, I thought we were in debt. How are we going to buy anything? Shouldn't we be saving money?
There's a term that's used for this new world order, this Nephilim world order, that is used, and there's several that mean the same thing. So when we talk about the New Age, that's the New Age of Atlantis, as Bacon wrote about as a Rosicrucian, and the second most powerful individual in England in 2 kingships and 2 bloodlines, Queen Elizabeth and then King James, who succeeded out of Scotland. And this new Atlantis was known as the Golden Age. Right? It's the first time. And this new Atlantis that Bacon writes about for the end time has a religion that's going to harmonize science, because science has its roots in polytheism. So they just want to bring it back to the home religion. And they created theosophy to be that religion, and the extension of so that's Gnosticism to theosophy, and then this extension out of that we would recognize better in North America is New Age. It's the same religion, it's just different labels for the same religion. And New Age does a little bit more as theosophy does in linking it to like the Eastern religions, right? Because it's the same essential religion at the core. And so this New Age that he calls the New Atlantis is an age where there's going to be this great advancement of people, and he becomes the inspirational founder for the Royal Society, and his picture still hangs in the entrance there to this day. But what's important is that Atlantean imagery, just as we see Atlantean as sort of this unexplained mythos that continues to play. And so Atlantis was this antediluvian city that was founded by Poseidon, as we understand the mythos as it comes down, but Poseidon probably inherits this mythos from Iapetus, who's the parent god, but nonetheless, it's the same story. So Poseidon in this case has a female named Clyto versus Clymene, which was Iapetus's human female. But Poseidon creates in the standard story that we get out of Timaeus and Cremaeus from Plato, creates 10 demigod giant kings, and Atlas is the one ruling Atlantis. And Atlantis has 10 ruling empires trying to take over world government, and is the most technically advanced civilization trying to create this one world government before the flood in the Golden Age. So, what does the Bible say about this? That in understanding, I'm talking about a Rosicrucian who wrote the New Atlantis. So that was from a polytheist side. So what's the monotheist side in this narrow example? Daniel 2, Daniel 7, Daniel 8, Revelation 12, 13, and 17 talk about the end time empire that has 10 kings, just as Atlantis had 10 kings. And this is represented in the 10 toes in the metallic empires of Daniel 2, the 10 horns of 10 kings in Daniel 7, and the 10 kings and horns in Revelation 12, 13, and 17. They're all talking about the same end time empire that's going to make the way for, according to the Western Europeans, their grand monarch, which would be a dragon messiah of the elven bloodline, according to the Elbigens bloodline. And so they're talking about the same organizational structure of ruling the world that's going to make the way for Lord Maitreya, which is another version of Mitra, or Baphomet, as the god that the Templars worshipped. That is this incarnation that comes at the end of the age that we would know from a monotheist perspective as Antichrist. And so you see this nexus and this inexplicable working towards this end. But understand the bloodlines want this rendezvous with destiny, and they want to have this end time war to win their freedom along with the gods that they follow. Now they look at themselves as the good ones and the people who believe in the Bible as the evil ones. So again, it's perspective,
Yeah.
but we're given these two choices. And I don't think it's a false flag of two choices. I think this is literally what we need to sort of discern. But no matter what, we're going to get to this end time. And that's what we need to be concerned about.
I feel like there's so many people working to bring about the end time, working overtime, so to speak.
Yeah, including the technology to get there.
Absolutely. And you know, that's a question that's definitely on my list. I hope that we get to it. But you know, what I don't understand is what I do understand is our collective beliefs shape our experience, and I understand the power of those beliefs, you know, and this isn't something that, you know, that the I think it says something like in the Bible about, you know, if you can move mountains if you
Yeah, if you have enough faith.
Yeah, and so it is something that, you know, people have a natural understanding of, but if they realize that literally, you know, if we came together, we wouldn't have to see the end, you know, the fire and brimstone that these prophecies call for. We could then create a fate that is not so apocalyptic, you know, that is a bit more utopian and in line with this beautiful planet that we live on, at the abundance that it provides. You know, we have literally enough of everything, including room, you know, all this myth about, you know, the scare tactics about overpopulation and the scarcity mindset that they have instilled in people makes this world a bleak place, but that's not the way I see it. And so, you know, I'm wondering, is this the only outcome that you see possible? You know, or is there one that is better for you and I, as opposed to just better for the Trumps and, you know, the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers?
It's always about free choice. But there's more than just humans that are making that free choice. You have the angelic realm, and you have the hybrid beings that were created by the angelic realm that are ruling this earth. And so you could have a free choice that would be made to work together, not persecute each other, and live in harmony. But the trouble is that the bloodline was created to wipe humanity from the face of the earth.
Why? Who did that? Why?
The fallen angels did, the gods.
Damn them.
So, but that doesn't mean they don't have free choice to walk away from that.
Right.
The problem is from a monotheist perspective, is God being Alpha Omega knows all of the free choices that are going to be made, and he only intercedes at times to not have the world end before all the names in the book of life have an opportunity to make that free choice. And their names were put in from before creation. So he intercedes with the flood. He intercedes at Babel. Anytime he intercedes, it's to ensure that everybody will have that gift of life and able to make a free choice. Now, with the spurious offspring of the fallen angels, they were trying to wipe us from the face of the earth. And they were, as we look at the description of the end time, it's going to be like the days of Noah. And there will be, as you get the linking of that overarching end time sign in Matthew 24 and Mark 13. In the book of Luke, you have the days of Noah and the days of Sodom, which is destruction by fire, just as 2 Peter 3 talks about the world is reserved for destruction in the end time by fire. And so the technology that was being developed before the flood in the antediluvian time is kind of hidden knowledge, right?
Yeah.
It's knowledge that's been suppressed, and they don't want us to know what happened exactly before the flood. But it's going to be like the days of Noah when the fallen angels walked amongst us as well as the giants, both before and after the flood. The days of Noah include 600 years before the flood for Noah, 350 years after the flood, which includes Sodom and Gomorrah. And so both sides of the flood, we had the parent gods ruling, then we had the offspring gods that ruling, walking amongst us. They disappear. Whatever your belief system is, they've gone somewhere, they've disappeared. I'll let people decide what they want to believe on that. But in the understanding of the ruling council of the council of gods, this is the host of heaven as their worship and represented in the skies. That's the Hebrew word Saba, which means an army of angels. So wherever the first two layers went, and of course in the mythology is the offspring gods murdered the parent gods, which I don't know how you kill an immortal being, but that's a different story. But they're gone, and then mysteriously the offspring gods disappear. In some accounts, like Baal, he's killed. But again, how is he killed? Why does he die? But you would have that definition of host as being Hebrew Saba for an army of angels that has rank and order. So other ones would move up to continue to rule the world, just as we're told biblically that Satan is the ruler of this world, the prince of this world, and he sits above that council of the gods. And so we're going to have that again in the end time. And when we start to overlay angelic technology, you have a scenario where if we're catching up to the times just before the flood, and we have planet capable destruction through fire today, and nothing is new under the sun, what was will be again, according to Ecclesiastes 1, and the understanding of that only brings grief and sorrow.
That's for sure.
That angelic technology was passed on to the giants, who were the cause of the violence all around the world for the flood. And that violence is more than just with swords. It's angelic technology that has the ability to destroy the world by fire. So the flood comes because it's not the time for the destruction by fire. But they wanted to destroy the world to get rid of all of humankind, because that's why they were created. And now in that belief system, there is this renewal of the earth with the destruction by fire that would be reserved for them and their immortal spirits in some sort of bodies that would be provided to live in that new world, just as Shiva comes as a destroyer, then a renewal of the earth. And that's the hope that I think that they had at that time. But we're seeing a repeat of that. We have this cycle of time that's continuing. And at Babel, you had all of the Noahites under one ruler, Nimrod, who imposes the antediluvian religion, according to the Gnostics, at Babel. And he is trying to do something that sounds like a madman. I am going to build something out of mud bricks, as we understand the language. And it could be something else from mud bricks, but that's the language that we understand it as the meanings today, into heaven. And if God gets out of line, according to Judaic mysticism, according to the book of Yashar, according to the Polychronicon and the history of Freemasonry, and other accounts, he's going to go into heaven and kill God. Well, you can't build mud bricks into heaven. It's not possible. So what's he talking about? Well, pyramids and ziggurats and towers in the ancient world were thought to be more than just a monument, but some sort of technology and energy plant and other applications, whatever that is. What's interesting is in the Akkadian version of what I would say would be the version of En Murakar at Eridu out of Ninurta's Pride and the Lord of Arata. The Akkadian language adaptation uses the word Babalu, ILU being a transliteration for EL. So Babel now doesn't mean in Akkadian confusion of languages. It means Bab is in a portal or a gateway, and ILU is in a god. So this is like a stargate or a gateway or a portal of the gods, and something possibly that's seemingly more like interdimensional travel. So that Antichrist would either travel into Sheol or Hades, Argatha, otherworld, all these other names that are used around the world, where the pit prison is, where biblically and according to Pistis Sophia, a Gnostic gospel, the original watchers are locked into this pit prison to release them and to honor the gods, both that were put there from after the flood, so short before Babel, but within 100 years, and the parent gods before, and to let them out. And all of the terrible ones, which are recorded in Ezekiel 32 as the spirits of these giants that are in prison, because they're the worst of the giants, who did horrible things to humankind, will be released. Now, how does this fit with what he might be doing as an antichrist figure who has complete control, put a Babylon religion on everybody that's prophesied for the end time? Well, in the end time that's reserved for the antichrist, he is actually going to go into heaven in Daniel 8:10, throw down some of the starry host and trample on them at the same time frame as Revelation 12. This is at the midpoint of the last 7 years when he comes to power, when you have a war in heaven. So thus you have another intercession, right? Because you have all of humankind at risk again.
Yeah. So you need an intercession.
Yeah. If it's going to play out so that all the names that are written in the book of life will have that opportunity. Yeah. And in what's really interesting is in the Septuagint, as it translates Genesis 10 and 11 for Nimrod, it is in Babel, Genesis 10 for Nimrod, Genesis 11 for the Babel story. It's talking about Nimrod gaining his reputation on giants that are already there. So again, you have this possible destruction of all of humanity, the presence of giants and the presence of angels that would have created the Rephaim giants, according to the Ugaritic texts.
I have a guest who comes on my show who's always talking about Nimrod and the current nation of Israel and, the Talmud and what he believes they're really about, which, I mean, if you just want to observe their actions, makes a lot of sense. Sadly, horrifically. I only laugh because it's such a tragedy has been going on for so long over there, with the amount of people being killed. And I'm wondering how you see, because clearly, the agenda is about population control. It's about culling the population in order to be able to handle it and manage it better as time continues on. And they do that in just about every way they can. They don't. There's no limit to what they will and won't do.
Well, and just look at one of their most effective tool is wars.
Yes.
And it's mostly people of the lower ranks that die en masse because the officers are the nobility class.
Right.
And it's a terrific polytheist, sacrificial bloodletting and a way of controlling the human population.
So how do you see, like when you see what's going on today and, it seems to me like you're very well informed about our quote world wars, and because people don't understand that this was these families going at each other and using nations as their chess pieces, to win the game, and it was the World War II. Were there good guys and bad guys? When you really dig into it, it's really hard to say. Like how can the people be sitting with Stalin be the good guys? I mean, that's my first question is, do you all know what Stalin was about? Like if you're sitting there smoking a cigar with him and putting your arm around him, that's like putting your arm around the devil, dude. That's a massive serial killer of epic proportions. Like how do you imagine you're on the side of right when your arm is around a demon? You know what I'm saying?
And how do good people say the enemy of my enemy is my friend?
Exactly. And that's why the whole world is losing their eyes, because everyone's going blind. An eye for an eye. Everyone is all about that. But
we see everything through the perpetual war gene that's imposed on us.
Yeah. I would be remiss if I wanted to ask you this question, and then we'll jump topics a little bit. But Christ has all these missing years, as I know you're probably well aware. He has his public ministry, and it's said that he may have traveled to places like Egypt and possibly, entered into some of the mystery schools there to learn, a lot of the metaphysics outside of the Judaic realm at the time. Yeah. And that, there are people who believe that his wisdom and prowess as far as metaphysical power came from the fact that he had absorbed all of these things, not just, the Judaic tunnel, philosophies and religions of the time. But, based on your research, what do you see when you look at his missing years, and what do you think it was about?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So you would have to say you can use data points to speculate with, which I'll do. So it's inexplicable that we would have different accounts of Jesus in different locations of the world, particularly as it's presented coming out of India and the Mesopotamian regions, of Jesus actually visiting there for a period of time. And we also have some accounts in the Quran of Jesus, and he's performing miracles as a child. And we also have accounts in the Bible that Mary has to flee with Jesus and Joseph. They have to go to Egypt for a while and then return right after Jesus was born, because they're trying to hunt him. And so we do know from this that Egypt would have had, Jesus there. So then we have this missing piece from the time of when he's a little bit older, and one account in the Bible when he's a little bit older and starting to do miracles, according to the Quran. And then he's gone for a bit, and then he just they bring in his history later. So you can't hide this individual after he starts doing things that nobody else
everyone's
can do.
talking about.
And everybody's talking about. And an understanding not only that is above the pay grade of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes, the three biggest groups at that time, but in ways that are not in line with what they would like to believe. So if you look at some of the details, the only way you can hide him for a while until he can grow into adulthood is to take him somewhere else. And then he would do these things because he was giving accounts within the temple that were astounding the hierarchy. They weren't ready to kill him at that point, but certainly when he came back as an adult and he started to do the same thing, they said, let's kill this guy. So again, you have to look at all of the details. I think it's likely, my speculation, that he did go elsewhere, and that as the human side, the soul and the body, the oikotarian, which was put into Mary, that the Word became flesh in, as the branch of God, the Word of God. Jehovah of the Elohim, as you would look at that from the Old Testament, Lord God, as it's poorly translated into English, is having that body sort of develop. And you need to be adulthood in Judaic society and in also other religious society of between 20 and 40 years old, 25 to become a priest in most accountings, before you're going to be taken seriously. So there's a period of time that they need to protect him to have that body sort of grow up, and in areas that are less likely to say he's saying blasphemy against the God of the Bible.
Yeah.
Right? So it makes sense to me that that would be the case.
It's amazing to me that they had to protect him more from what is still considered to be his actual religious beliefs. You know what I mean? Like, I don't, and that to me, don't get me wrong, that's the same ones who ended up getting him in the end, if you want to.
Yeah. It's free choice. And even for the nation of priests that are created, right? And they create, there's a holy covenant that's created at the time of Israel, which is a amalgamating of all the other covenants made from Adam to Noah to Abraham down through Isaac and Jacob and then into Israel. And within the Holy Covenant, there are written the fine details that Israel needed to pay more attention to. And so if they followed the ways of God, they would have their history and the world history fulfilled through the blessings of the covenant. But if they violate that covenant, they will. They did many times, and even a patient God finally says, "We'll let it play out the way you've chosen." And what I mean by that is they're going to be fulfilled through the curses of the covenant. So the first application of full-blown application of the curses of the covenant come in 721 with the destruction of northern tribes of Israel, the northern kingdom of Israel, who have already separated from the southern kingdom, and Judah, the southern kingdom, will repent. But they're lost into the world, and we won't see them till the last 7 years again when they're awakened in all the nations around the world and called back by name. Now, Judah, after they repent, they backslide by the covenant again, and they get exiled into Babylon. But he brings them back to, God lets them come back to the covenant land, and they recommit themselves again. And as it progresses, by the time of and they're looking for their Messiah. They're desperate for their Messiah between the different beast empires occupying their land, mostly the Greek and the Romans in the Second Temple period. They're about to violate their covenant in the most significant way by rejecting their Messiah. And what's interesting on that story is that just before Jesus goes into the temple to directly challenge them, he goes to a fig tree, grabs a fruit, eats it, and then kills the fig tree. And the disciples are kind of mystified. And then he says, the fig tree no longer bears fruit. In prophetic allegory of the Old Testament, the northern kingdom is the vine of the garden, and Judah, the southern kingdom, is the fig tree and the fig, as they're referred to. So the disciples know what he's talking about, and they're mortified. And then what does he do? He goes into the temple and prophesizes the destruction of the temple and the destruction of Jerusalem.
Yeah, you can see why they were upset.
And the reason for these two steps is because they're about to violate the covenant and crucify Jesus. And then right after that, the disciples go up to them because they're rightly concerned, and they ask him about what will be the signs of your coming and the major events of the end time. They want clarification on this. And that's when he goes in and gives his end time chronology in chronological order. And so once you start to understand the details of the Old Testament as it plays out in the New Testament, things start to make a lot more sense. So that's the curse. And what happens is Judea gets spread in a diaspora all around the world by the Roman Empire and almost wiped from the face of the earth. And so in Jesus' end time chronology, he talks about the fig tree again. Because it's all connected in terms of what he's just done. And he says, when you see the fig tree, know that, and it's in full bloom, and that's the southern kingdom back in the covenant land and in control of Jerusalem, because it's an epicenter for end time prophecy. Know that everything I said will be fulfilled the way I said it. Heaven and earth may pass away, but my words will never pass away. So he's making very, very clear that this is going to happen in a specific generation, and to be aware of it, and destruction is going to be coming following Judea. So again, God has let this all play out through free choice, and had Israel chosen better, we would have had a completely different outcome. But God allows everything to play out through free choice for a particular period of time, so nobody can say they didn't have a choice.
I see this, what's going on, and not to wade into political waters, or get you waded into it with me, but like the notion that, like, because I hear a lot of Orthodox Jews saying, if you read the Torah, it tells you that we were exiled, that we don't have a land, that we were to populate the world and live in those different countries and be good citizens
until the end time, according
to the end
Torah.
times, then you have other people saying, no, that land, Palestine, was promised to the Jews, and that it's actually rightfully theirs because God promised them that. So God did a real estate deal way back, and we lost the contract. But trust us, it's their land. And so even though these people have, are kind of directly related to those, to the people who used to live there. How do
there's two sets of events that are connected, but you have to understand the chronology. So when it says in the Torah that they're going to be gathered back to their land, that happens in the last 3.5 years. That will happen after lost Israel has been awakened, after the abomination, after Antichrist has come to power. But end time prophecy also has the southern kingdom back in the land. We're not told how that happens, versus we're told about how the second Exodus will come about and the details of that. But we're not told of how Judah, the southern kingdom, ends up back in there. But we do know Jesus refers to them with the fig tree allegory that they're back in the land. And so we see them show up in the Gog War of Ezekiel 38 and 39. And so they're back in the land and they're in control of Jerusalem. And a lot of people think this is Armageddon, but it's not. It's still to come. And we know it's in the last days because Ezekiel 38 says it's in the last days. Ezekiel 39, after they bury this army that's defeated, that has attacked Israel, then second Exodus happens. So we know it's before second Exodus in the end time. And so we know that the seven shepherds and Jehovah and David will lead Israel back after the abomination, according to Old Testament prophecy. So we have lots of prophecies that can intersect. I don't want to go through a whole show of prophecies, just as a general sort of understanding here. Now, Joel 1 and 2 is the same war. And then Joel 4 shows the Armageddon War. Joel 1 and 2 has these same chimera-type creatures, both riders and beasts, that are shown in Revelation 9 when the pit prison is opened before the midpoint of the last 7 years. And this is a 200 million man army. This is the counterfeit Armageddon Antichrist will utilize. So we don't know how Israel is prophesied to be put back into the land. We just know they're there. So how they get back isn't God saying, I'm interceding and putting them back.
Right.
So now it starts to make some sense as to how Israel might be created through the mystical side and the connection to the bloodlines and the secret societies to create this state as an extension of the two world wars to get them back into the end time, and the Rothschild money and all the other movements that are mystical and secret society orientated. And to be very, very clear, I'm not saying that this isn't the Southern Kingdom, and there is going to be a remnant that God is going to fight for.
Yeah.
But this is done at the hands of our current world order.
Yeah.
To put them in there. And I'm not saying that God has sanctioned it or not sanctioned it. All I'm saying is he provided through his prophets that they're there.
Right.
Before the second Exodus, before Antichrist comes to power. And Antichrist is going to permit them to do sacrifices on a wing of a temple for the first 3.5 years, as Daniel 9:27 talks about. So all of this is details that we're told about, but not exactly how they come back to the land, only that they're there. So we want to distinguish divine intervention and what the world does, just as the catastrophes in the end time, definitely for the seals and the trumpets, is not God's judgment. He doesn't judge his people. This is the world doing it to ourselves.
Right. That makes a lot of sense to me. Everything you just said, and it opens up a lot of questions. But I want to.
It certainly does. It answers a lot of questions, and then it just raises even more.
It does. I mean, literally, I feel like you could really just talk for days. There's just so much. But while I have you, I want to take you a little farther out and ask you some questions that you probably typically don't get, but
Sure.
that I love to talk about. And I'm wondering, first of all, have you ever seen a UFO? And I'm sure you've seen videos of them if you haven't seen one in the sky. And in your belief system, does it allow for extraterrestrial life, extraterrestrial
Sure.
visits, and all that? Like, where do you fall in with all that?
So I've not seen a UFO,
Not yet.
not yet, or not recognized.
Right.
So just to be clear, and I'm not against them being here. I think you have way too many accounts to dismiss them all. So I'm very open to the ideology that we have UAPs, we have different types of beings. I'm not open to the propaganda that we're being told.
Yeah.
I tend to think everything they say is misdirection. So, and
It tends to be misdirection,
Yeah. So when I look at the Bible and I look at the standard organizational structure, I see two sides to that coin. One are the invisible ones, one are the visible ones. And so the invisible ones are angelic beings as a spirit being. Doesn't mean they can't take a physical form, because they can. And biblically, we know they can, because, and Christians will say they can't. Well, you have to read the Bible. So don't leave out the inconvenient passages. So how do I know that? Just quickly for any Christians that are out there. Hebrews 13, be nice to strangers lest you come across an angel unaware. So they can look like a human, act like a human, interact physically. You won't know the difference. Sodom story beginning with Jehovah making himself into a physical form and two angels. Abraham first doesn't recognize them as humans, and then they interact physically. Then the two angels go to Sodom and Gomorrah, but the people of Sodom and Gomorrah know they're angels and judges, so they can make themselves known even though they're in human form, and they want to have sex with them, which is a physical activity, or they want their daughters to have sex with them, or they want them to change them to females to create more giants. Either way, there's more going on into the story than most Christians are led to believe. So just a quick sort of understanding of the oiketerion, that soul in the body that I talked about, which is of the physical world, and the spirit comes from heaven, unless it's a counterfeit spirit, xeroxed in a sexual act by the fallen angels to create their offspring. So as we look at, what was the question again?
Well, just regarding your beliefs around like extraterrestrials and UFOs.
Yes, I'm getting there. Yeah, good. I just needed that as a quick reminder. Thank you. So we have these visible beings being presented as part of the visible ones that Ephesians talks about, visible ones and invisible ones that we fight against, those of spirit and flesh, as other passages will tell us. These are part of the hierarchy of the visible ones that do things on earth as are done in their heavens. Hades or Sheol or Argatha, all the other words for the other world. And they're given the divine right to do that. So they're part of the hierarchy. They're kind of at the top of the hierarchy in the visible world. Now, in the invisible world, when the bodies die of the giants, and in Genesis 6:3, God is not going to permit them to have an immortal body and an immortal spirit that comes from the fallen angels exist in the earth. So he limits life to 120 years. So their bodies will die, and because it's a counterfeit spirit of the fallen angels, it's not permitted into heaven. So it's going to wander the earth as in dry places, as Jesus encounters these devils. Greek daemon, not diablos, as it's used for Satan. So we know these are the unclean, evil spirits and disembodied spirits. Moving quickly here, I know. And that when they die, they're part of the invisible hierarchy, but at the bottom, right? Now, in the visible part, because of the divine representatives, they're also going to have a bottom order. And there's going to be some beings in between in that hierarchy. These are the elementals that the occult calls them. And the elementals are fit into 4 separate groups. 3 little groups, and then 1 larger reptilian group that would be a salamander. All are linked to the elements of the world, the basic elements like fire, air, wind, basic polytheist sort of doctrine. The salamanders live in the earth or in another dimension, typically in the earth in tunnels and things like that. And the 3 little groups are ones like, leprechauns and pixies, which would be...
That's the Fey realm, right?
Yeah, the Fey realm. These are mischievous ones, good-looking ones, and they're called the little ones. Like Tinkerbell would be a good-looking
like cherubims, almost.
Depending on which face of the cherubim you're going to look at.
Right?
Yeah. And then you have the ugly ones like the trolls.
Yeah,
the hobbits.
Trolls. Yeah.
The elves, or the dark elves, and the gnomes. So these are created by the gods in all of the polytheist cultures around the world. And each of them are assigned a specific role in the hierarchy. And so I don't know how many different types of creatures that there would be. I don't know where Bigfoot might fit in, but you could make a large list of groups if you looked into polytheism, and we would understand ones as well that would be chimera type of creatures coming out of Greek mythology and other cultures. But chimera is what's used for DNA manipulation, where you have different levels of maybe the combination of a human spirit and an animal spirit through DNA and a fallen angelic one. So I think there's a hierarchy based on how they created these beings. And some of them were created in a cloud, like Amakaseth or the centaurs, for example, in Greek mythology. So there's different ways that they're showing. And not all of the giants are even classified as demigods, as in 50-50, with a human and a God creating them. You have in the Sumerian accounts, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, for example, not only for antediluvian survivors, in that account of Utnapishtim and all of his family, they're 2/3 God, 1/3 human, not 50-50. Something different going on here. And then Gilgamesh and Enkidu are also classified as 2/3 God and 1/3 human. So just connecting data points, they have ways in the angelic technology to splice this somehow. I don't know how. I don't mean to say. I'm just saying there's an observation there. So within the hierarchy of the ugly ones, you have ones called the gnomes. They were had a specific agenda or purpose why they were created. Just as we see, let's say in the Lord of the Rings, as one other quick example, these made in prehistory the weapons of the demigods.
Yeah.
Just as they're shown in Lord of the Rings, in the earth, in the mountains, creating these weapons. Okay, just to give. Now, the gnomes are in charge of technology, are in charge of genealogies, knowledge, and they have UAPs that come through fairy domens, DOLMEN. They, throughout our history, they kidnap people. They do sexual experimentations on them, do sorts of all, come back, probing, return them. People have no memories. Sounds awfully like an alien abduction.
The abduction experience.
Yeah. And I put 2 descriptions of these fairy abductions in book 1. And those gnomes are called gray gnomes.
Wow.
And their description is identical to the grays. So I tend to lean a little bit more towards interdimensional travel versus intergalactic travel.
Right.
And so I don't deny the existence, but the question always comes back, so I need a good answer on this, is how do I get there biblically?
Yeah.
Well, very good question that I asked myself there. I have to have a little bit of fun with it. So, because it's a very serious subject. So,
yeah.
but there's a Greek word called stoichian. and it means two things. One is a being, and one is a basic element of the world. So it can be used both ways, and it's used both ways in the New Testament. That comes from Greek versus Hebrew. And so when it's talking about the basic elements of the earth, as in 2 Peter 3, when it's talking about the destruction by fire and those elements that are destroyed, that's stoichian. Now, in Galatians, it talks about elements as ones who enslave us in this world. While inanimate objects don't enslave us in the world, but beings do. So you would apply that. And then stoichian is also in Colossians translated as rudiments of this world that enslave us. And in both of these passages, they're talking about the angelic realm and different sort of hierarchies and things that they do. So again, the context is all pointing to us, and rudiment goes back to stoichian. So we have elementals that are showing up in the Bible, and we also have a group of unexplained people, and I think it's in Ezekiel 26, it's the Gamadim, that are in the towers of Tyre in the time of Nebuchadnezzar, and has romped through the ancient world to build the Babylonian Empire. It's rooted in the Hebrew word gamad, meaning a cubit, so 18 inches to 21 inches. So you have these Gamadim, which are very small people that were in the towers as warriors, and we have no explanation as to who they are and no patriarch for them.
Wow. It's so much. But your knowledge is incredible, Gary. We're going to have to do this again because I have so many questions, and I'm sure I'm going to listen to this whole thing and have even more questions than I do right now. So I mean, I would love to have you back on again. I'm running out of time right now, but I want you to tell everyone where to find you. You know, how they can keep up with you. I'm sure that everyone is going to be very interested. I'm sure your books are available on Amazon, and tell everyone what they need to know.
Yeah, and I'll close off on this so that, because we've talked about bloodlines and stuff like that. And biblically, again, for the Christian audience, but I think it's eye-opening for non-Christian audience as well, is that there has to be a reference in there to, otherwise you're just building on speculation. So there are lots of passages. This is the most clearest one, and the rendezvous with destiny that they're trying to break out. Psalms 21, 8 through 10. And I'll just read it. It won't take long.
Okay.
It says, I'll start in verse 9. It says, "Thou shalt make them as a fiery oven in the time of thine anger, and the Lord shall swallow them up in his wrath." So the anger and the wrath are terms that are going to go back to the year of the Lord's wrath in the last year of the last 7 years. "And the fire shall devour them." Destruction by fire that we talked about earlier. "Their fruit thou shalt destroy from the earth, and their seed from among the children of men." There is a bloodline that is talked about that is working its way through all of our history that comes to an end in the end time. This is the branch of the terrible ones that Isaiah 25 talks about that are going to be destroyed on a mountain in the year of the Lord's wrath, and that's Mount Hermon. And all things that we need to dig into. Who are the terrible ones?
I can name a few.
Yes. And so the best way to get a hold of me is through my website at the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis 6, the number 6conspiracy.com. On that website, I have a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters of Book 1 and all 84 chapters of Book 2. You can get a signed copy through my website if you like what I'm saying and you want to learn more or you want to support me. I don't accept donations in any sort of way. So if you like what I'm saying, you want to get a signed copy, you can go to the Buy Now page and go to buy Book 1 or to Book 2 or to the third page if you want to buy one of each or mixed quantity of each. And there's quantity discounts on all of the pages for the more books that you buy. If you wanted to link over to Amazon.com, Amazon.ca, or BarnesandNoble.com, you can do that right from that buy page and from the front of the website. And you can also link over from the website to the Kindle edition to get the digital, and also over to Amazon on the Audible link to get the Audible version of Book 1 and Book 2 that just came out in the last few months. So that's the best way to get a hold of me or the book. And if you want to learn a little bit more in detail, I have a section that's done on 2-hour sections on a show I did with the host of each section in the book where we cover some interesting things. So for both books on the media page. And not only just covering that, but the really difficult questions that people have, Christian and non-Christian, about the Bible as it might pertain to the section that we're talking about.
Awesome. Awesome, Gary. Thank you so much. For everyone listening, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And if you're listening on audio, please drop us a review if you enjoyed this podcast. Show some love to Gary. We appreciate any kind words and any stars you want to leave us. Gary, we have to do it again. I'll be in touch and I'll let you know when this is going to come out and everything. But I appreciate your time so much. I appreciate your wisdom and the incredible amount of information that you just gave us. Is just I'm going to be listening to it more than once. I know that. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And it's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yes, we're going to do it again. I'll be in touch. Thank you.